Joshua Smith here, and welcome to the GSD Mode Podcast. Now get shit done and smash that subscribe button now. What is up, my peeps? Joshua Smith here with another GSD Mode Podcast interview. Every single week, I interview top entrepreneurs, top real estate professionals, and straight up top badasses that are out there dominating their space. These are people choosing to not live a life of mediocrity, but instead to go out there and create big, amazing, epic lives for themselves, for their families, as well as have a big impact on others. And today, guys, we have another amazing guest here on the podcast. We have Dr. Eric Cole. Now, Dr. Eric Cole is a cybersecurity expert and an entrepreneur with over 30 plus years of experience. He's a previous CIA hacker who then went on to grow multiple companies, one of which he sold for over $400 million and another one that he sold for over $2 billion. And he breaks down and shares so much amazing information with us on this podcast about his journey to creating success, about how to find your purpose, how to go out there and create a great, amazing company. Talks to us and breaks down the threats that we face today with cybersecurity, how we can protect ourselves, and so much more in, again, this amazing podcast interview. Now, real quick, before we jump on in, if you haven't already, make sure to go download my free book. This is my new book that I just released at joshuasmithfreebook.com. It's how to dominate your real estate business, top tips from a top producer, where I give you top tips, top strategies, and different methods that I've used over my 15 plus year long real estate career to become one of the top realtors and team leaders on the planet. It's 100% free, nothing being sold. Again, joshuasmithfreebook.com. All right, let's jump into this amazing podcast interview with Dr. Eric Cole. All right, Dr. Eric Cole, welcome to the GSD Mode Podcast, my friend.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I mean, you're a guy that's done so much, right? Over the past, your 30 plus year now entrepreneur career. You've built so much, you've created so much, you've done so much. And so really excited to have you on, really excited to be able to pick your brain and dive into it. And before we get into all the amazing things that you're up to today, I'm always intrigued in our guest journeys on how this journey began in the first place. We're on that clock, 30 or so years. I mean, how did you get into this space in the first place?
It's one of those, when I look back at a lot of different things, to me, it really comes back to the theme of my life is sort of listening to that inner voice, trust that things will work out, and take lots of chances. But I'll give you some examples. So back in the mid 80s, when I was in high school, I really wanted to be an architect because I just was fascinated how things worked. And a friend of the family, he came to me and he said, Eric, everything's moving to computers. You should major in computer science because if you know how to use computers and program computers, you can do anything. So that's going to be a much better option. So that's sort of my first lesson learned in life, which is surround yourself with people that are smarter than you and have trusted advisors, because you don't know everything and other people can give you perspectives that you don't see. So I trusted him and I went for computer science. Then I'm in computer science classes, and it was more engineering. And I remember it was a Thursday afternoon. And for weeks, I was thinking about going to the co-op office because I didn't know what a computer scientist does, and I wanted some experience in life. So I'm sitting there, and it's like something inside me said, you must go today. You must go today. You must go now. My class ended at 2:30, and sure enough, the co-op office is about a mile away on campus, and it's pouring rain. So it's like I'm being tested, but I'm like, no, something inside me said I must go today. So I trenched across campus, and I walk in, and the lady's like, oh, so you heard about this? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, once every 2 years, the CIA recruits on campus, and we have one slot left, and they're coming tomorrow. Do you want the slot? And I'm just sitting there going, if I would have waited a day, if I would have waited a couple more days, I would have missed out on the opportunity. And the CIA then became a pivotal part of my career. So that was another one where sometimes that inner voice, you just got to trust it and listen to it. And then I go in and I co-op with the CIA, and I'm in this big meeting. And if you've ever seen a Tom Clancy movie at the CIA, when they zoom in, there's this bubble looking thing that's a big auditorium. They call it the bubble. It's a huge auditorium. And I'm in an all hands meeting, about 3,000 people. And they're talking about the future and the internet. Now, this was in 91. So like before the internet, before the web, and they're talking about the internet, the future, and everything's moving towards this. And I'm always a curious person, so I raised my hand. What I didn't realize is you weren't supposed to ask questions. And my boss is in the front and she's like, put your hand down, man. And I'm like, hey, what's up, though? She's waving to me. And I asked my question, and it ended up being one that changed my entire career. But I sort of paused for a moment because that's another big one where one of my favorite quotes is, don't be afraid to raise your hand when no one else is. Don't be afraid to ask questions. One of my favorite quotes that I always teach my kids is, smart people know the right answer. Brilliant people ask the right question. And the question I asked that changed my career was, how do we know these systems are secure? How do we know they're protected and safe? So all these big wig execs, they sort of look at each other and they're like, Eric, thank you for volunteering to solve it. I'm like, well, I wasn't going to solve it. And it turns out there is no way to prove a system is secure. The only way you could prove a system is secure is by breaking in. So that one question put me on a journey where I became a professional hacker for the CIA for 8 years, learning how to break into every system, understand exposures, vulnerabilities, and that basically set me up for my entire career by going in and doing those. So to me, when I sort of look back and fast forward, sort of those pivotal moments were listen to other folks, trust your inner voice, and don't be afraid to raise your hand when no one else is. And then that sort of set me up for when I left the CIA to start my companies, grow several companies, be very, very successful. And then I'd probably say the only other thing that I put into this is because with these interviews, we talk about successes and we talk about all the things I did right. We're going to be covering about 2% of my life. The 98% are the things I did wrong. So the only other thing I want to add is when I sort of look at life, you got to embrace failure. You got to recognize that failure isn't failure. It's teaching you lessons. And the only difference between successful and not successful people, the only difference between me and people that work for a 9-to-5 company and don't have their dreams fulfilled is simple. I'm afraid to quit. I will not quit. I will not stop. You can tell me no 200 times and I'll ask 200 more. So I just, that's my other big lesson is I know there's a yes in every situation and I won't stop until I find it.
Yeah, no, I love that. So powerful. And you know, I'm curious, what drove you to wanting to I mean, you were with the CIA for a long time, and what drove you? Like, what was it that you were like, hey, I know that maybe I'm meant for something different, or that led to, because I'm sure that you could have had a very long, lucrative career doing what you were doing.
Yeah, so it's one of those where in the government, there's sort of at about 8 to 9 years, you get this reflection point where you sort of have to make a decision. Do you stay or do you go? Because once you've been at the government for 11 or 12 years, you might as well stay till 20 and get the pension. Yeah. But it's, and to me, in my opinion, if you leave before 8 years, you really don't have the experience, the understanding of how that works. So I got to that 8-year mark and I sort of had to decide. And probably the biggest thing for me was at the time at the CIA, I was a GS-12. And if you don't understand, it's a grade system that they use. And they basically sat me down and said, okay, Eric, we have so many people ahead of you that you will not even be eligible for promotion for 8 years. And I remember saying, what if I save the president's life? And they're like, you'll get medals and we'll love you, but you can't get promoted. It's just impossible. So I'm a big fan of you should be rewarded based on your work ethic and what you do, not based on some political rules. So that sort of was issue one. And then sort of the straw that broke the camel's back is when I started being a professional hacker, I was a team of one, and I built it to a team of 47 people. And they then sat me down and said, Eric, now that your team is above 35 people, we need to put a manager in front of it. I said, great. They're like, but you can't be a manager unless you're a GS-13. I'm like, but I've been running the team for 3 years. They're like, yep, but if we do a 3-year review and that's the case. So they're like, you have to decide. You either have to be a manager or you have to be a technical. You can't do both. And I'm like, but I like both. Why can't I do both? And they're like, well, you can't because that's not the rule. So with those things, I'm like, okay, it's time to go out on my own because I believe that good entrepreneurs can also be technical folks and you should be able to do both of those. So that was sort of that deciding pivotal point to leave and just being fair with you. And I was young, naive, a little cocky. I'm not saying I'm still not that way today, but I also had a hard time reporting to people that didn't know what they were talking about. So I had some great bosses at the CIA. I had some not so great ones. So I had some trouble with authority in cases where when they told me to do things that were illogical. So it was sort of a natural progression for me to leave and sort of do my own thing, be my own entrepreneur, just sort of jump off that cliff, as I like to use, bounce off the rocks a little bit and learn those lessons of life.
Yeah. So I mean, all that red tape, I'm sure, was so frustrating, but at the end, it turned out to be a huge blessing because you went out and created these amazing companies and have done all this amazing stuff. But I'm curious, while you were at the CIA, I'm sure that there was some, just some great times and some very interesting things and interesting, things that you were working on and so forth. What was, like an example or one of your favorite stories or kind of craziest experiences there?
It's funny because when people bring up the CIA, I always caveat it with two things. With one is, it sounds a lot cooler than it really is. So I'm glad people have that perception that I did really cool stuff. And there were some cool times. But I also joke that in my career right now, I've traveled to every single country in the world. All of the crappy places I did while I was at the CIA, and all the great places I did when I left the CIA, right? So I got to go to some crazy places, Karachi and things like that. I would say probably one of the funnest ones is it got to the point where when you're trying to break into systems, it tends to get pretty easy because there's always vulnerabilities and there's always issues. So we actually had a contest, and I don't know because it's been a long time, so I don't know if somebody broke the record, but I hold the record when I left of 37 minutes of being able from start to finish in 37 minutes, being able to break and take complete control over a nuclear reactor. So that's sort of, that was sort of one of my records there. And it's one that I joke, it wasn't necessarily my skill set, but what it shows is that these systems are out there exposed and vulnerable, and people just don't realize that if you understand how they operate, it's easier to break in than most of us would want to realize.
Yeah, that's so crazy how this whole journey of, the cybersecurity space that you've become such an expert in all started kind of on accident from listening to your intuition and raising your hand.
Exactly. And it even gets more bizarre than that, because when I went in and they flew me down for a co-op and accepted me and I got all my clearances, an intern at the CIA is just like a full employee, but it doesn't count against your business, your overhead. So every business unit wants interns. So when I started interviewing at all the different units, it was a reverse interview. They were trying to convince me to go work for them. So one of the offices I interviewed was a networking office. Another one was a network operations center. Another one was a programming job. And the last one was Office of Security. Now, once again, this was in the 90s. And I remember talking to my advisors at school, and they're like, go for networking. Everything is networking. Everything is networking. Go for networking. But this is going to sound counterintuitive. It's good to have advisors around you, but sometimes you have to trust your instinct. And I'm like, that security office sounds really cool. It sounds really crazy. You're going to pay me basically to break things and try to do crazy stuff. So it was one where I went to the not popular office that most people weren't picking. And once again, it was listening to that inner voice, raising my hand, and things look back going, it's funny how little things played such a significant role in where I am today.
Yeah, no, I love that. So then when you leave, fast forward, you leave the CIA, did you at that point continue to stay in the cybersecurity space? Or did you pivot and do other, kind of dabble in other just programming?
I stayed. Well, I'm one of the unique folks that I got my degrees in cybersecurity. I'm trained in cybersecurity, and I love cybersecurity. So no, I've always been in cybersecurity. So all the companies that I worked for and ran, I was always either CTO. So as soon as I got out, I actually went and became a chief security officer for a large telecom. And that great position, right, great title, doubled what I was making at the agency, thought life was great. But once again, I learned a hard lesson. I was an overhead function. So my budget was dependent on how well the rest of the company did. Yeah. And if the company did good, I got budget. If they didn't do good, I didn't get budget. I'm like, I'm not controlling my destiny here. So being CTO, CSO, those type things, you don't control your destiny. So that was sort of the second step after I left. And then I joined up with a group of folks where they started and I joined as the security and the technical expert, a company called TSGI that we ended up selling to Lockheed Martin. And that's when I really learned my entrepreneur. And that was another interesting one. All the folks that I teamed up with were all 45 and 50-year-olds at the time. And I'm 26. And everyone's like, you got to go find younger folks. I'm like, I don't want to team up with younger folks because they're as dumb and stupid as me. I want to find the people that made the mistakes, that have the expertise and the knowledge and learn from them. So I remember the first year or two of that company, they would all laugh at me because they're like, Eric, thank God you're bringing in so much business and the technology and the intellectual property, because all you do in our executive meetings is ask questions. You're not contributing at all because I'm just drawing information from them. So that was my other lesson, is you really got to recognize what you know and don't know, and then surround yourself with people that strengthen your weaknesses and can teach you information. And even today, when I go in and I form partnerships or I meet new friends, I'm always looking at two things. Can I help you and can you help me? Because you really want to always be able to grow and learn.
Yeah, love it. Powerful stuff, man. So I'm curious, when you, the lessons that you just talked about that you learned from the CIA, plus, being the CTO and so forth, having those constraints, and you start to navigate to now becoming an entrepreneur as well as an expert at in your niche that you're in. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced? Because we hear so many people that are maybe we're consultants or great at their niche, but then they jump into business and it's a whole nother beast now. What were some of those, really tough, I guess, lessons, new challenges that you had to overcome as you started your own companies?
Yeah. I would say one of them is communication. Even today, I could sometimes be accused of my team of being a little abrupt, speaking my mind, being an a-hole, stuff like that. And what I learned is you can be the smartest person on the planet, but if you can't communicate with other people, if you can't go in and explain to them in non-technical ways and make them feel comfortable about what you're doing, you're never, ever going to be successful. The second big one is, I don't care who you are or what you do. If you're going to be successful in life, I can guarantee that you're a master of sales. Because I was always growing up that sales is evil. You have the slimy used car salesmen that are trying to sell you something you don't want, blah, blah, blah. And I had to also learn that lesson that you got to love and embrace sales, because that's the only way you can be successful. If you can't sell people, then you're not going to be able to get married. You're not going to be able to hire employees. You're not going to be able to grow your business. And I had to do this sort of mental epiphany that sales is not bad. What sales is this: you have a pain, I have a solution, and my solution is the best, most cost-effective way of taking away your pain. So if I don't give you that solution, I'm allowing you to suffer. So to me, it's actually a disservice for me not to pick up the phone, call you, and tell you about my solution, because you need it and I can help solve your problem. And like, as soon as I got that, it was like everything changed, because now all of a sudden I was excited and looking forward to doing it. And then the last thing was, if you're going to be an entrepreneur or run a company or really anything, you really got to understand numbers. You got to be able to, I'm not saying you should be an accountant, but you should be able to glance at a balance sheet, know what a profit and loss statement is. And to me, the big lesson I learned is revenue doesn't mean anything if you don't look at all the surrounding numbers. You got to look at all the other numbers, because we had a company that was making 80 million at the time, and we were struggling because we had 1-year contracts and we were only making about a 4 to 5% profit on that. So when you go to look for investment, you go to look for selling and things like that, they're like, okay, your company's not really worth anything. Maybe we'll give you a 1x multiplier if you're lucky, but you're really not making any profitability. So here we have an $80 million company, and I'm eating mac and cheese, and we're living out of small houses because I'm making $30,000 a year, because after you pay the employees, after you pay the rent, after you pay everything else, there wasn't a whole lot left in the bank account. So I really learned a lot that it's all the other numbers that are important in terms of subscription, product, multiplier, multi-year contracts, all those factors. And now when I always build companies, I'm always shooting for two things. One, at least a 60% profitability on every dollar that I make. and at least a 6x multiplier on what the company's worth overall. And that drives my friends crazy, because I had a company that I built to about 7 mil, and it had a 6x multiplier. So it actually sold for 40 million. And I had friends that had 15, 20 million company that nobody would want to buy. And they're like, wait a second, you're making a third. And I'm like, because you don't understand the math. You don't understand the business. It's not as simple as revenue. You got to look at all those other numbers.
Yep. No, love it. Powerful stuff, man. I'm to kind of take things in a slightly different direction. I mean, most of our listeners are tied, entrepreneurs, and most are tied to the real estate space and so forth. And, it's something that is a small business owner, I guess. When I think of cybersecurity, I think of massive companies, right? But we don't always think about it as small business owners or people on a day-to-day thing. For small business owners or just people in their day-to-day lives, what are some of the, I guess, the threats or things that we should have awareness from or with when it comes to cybersecurity today?
Yeah, I'll start strategic and then jump technical really quick. But to me, strategically, you got to understand two things. I don't care how big your business is. I don't care how many employees you have. I don't care how much money you have in the bank. You need to accept and recognize that you are a target, and cybersecurity is your responsibility. It's one of those things where somebody's like, why would somebody come after me? I have a real estate business. I have 200,000 in the bank. I have $1 million of assets. I'm so small. I'm so tiny. Why would anybody mess or come after me? And here's what you have to remember. If I'm going to go and try to break in to, let's say, a Fortune 50 company, they spend $30 million on security, and they have 200 people doing their security. That's going to be pretty hard to break in. They're going to have vulnerabilities, but they're watching, they're doing what they're supposed to, they're on top of it. You're a 1 or 2 person making a little under $1 million a year. How much money do you spend on security? Probably $200 or maybe zero. And who does your security? Your 17-year-old nephew that does it between playing his games and everything else. So who's going to be easier to break into and who's going to go undetected? And here's the thing that everyone misses. Today's attackers, they're not trying to steal $1 million from one company. They're trying to steal $100 from 1 million people. So if you have 20, 30, and they take small amounts so you don't notice it. And then the final thing is you watch the news, and all the news covers are the big stuff. They're not going to cover a small hack, but I'll tell you, 70, 80 small companies get breached and attacked every single day, and nobody ever knows about it. Nobody ever goes in and detects it. So some of the things you want to be careful of is small companies, don't try to do it yourself. Outsource it to the cloud, a third party. I go in and I use Office 365 if you want to use Amazon. But these companies, they do a really good job with security. They protect the data. They put the measures in place. Don't try to run your own servers. Do your own analysis. It's just not going to work. And then finally, your biggest threat is you. The number one threat to small businesses is phishing attacks, where you get an email that looks legitimate. You get an email from your bank that says, we've noticed some unusual activity with your account, right? It's 10 p.m. at night. You're tired. You're not thinking straight. You have a couple of whiskeys in you, and you go, okay, and you click on it. And as soon as you click it, boom, game over. So one thing that I do when I train all entrepreneurs and folks that I coach is when you're checking email and surfing the web, use a non-Windows-based system. Most of the malware out there is written for Windows because 90% of all computers are Windows. So what I do is in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening, when I do my initial check of email and I'm researching, I use an iPad. 2 things. 1, most of the malware doesn't run on an iPad because it's a simpler device. So even if it was malicious, I wouldn't get infected. And second, I don't have any critical data on my iPad. So even if it got infected, it wouldn't do any harm. And then once I pre-screen the email and surf the web on my non-Windows device, then I can go to my Windows computer and do my work, do my analysis, and produce the reports for my client.
Yeah. I was listening to a podcast recently with John McAfee, who created and it was on Patrick David Bett interviewing him. And now this is after he sold his software, but he made a comment on there of today, and with the brilliance of the hackers days, like you're wasting your money. It isn't going to keep you secure. And it kind of just blew my mind thinking, right? Yep. No, I love that, man. So then, when you mentioned that your iPad and that device, is there, because I've heard things like, Mac as a whole isn't as susceptible as, PCs and so forth. Is there truth to that, or is it just because you're just using that device just for your kind of playtime?
It's true, but it's not the truth. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So if you look at any operating system, whether it's Mac, whether it's Linux, whether it's Android, whether it's Windows, building an operating system is difficult, and they all have the same number of vulnerabilities. So this concept that Mac is more secure than Windows is not true. They're all vulnerable. They all can be compromised. They all can be broken into. Here's the difference. If I'm an attacker and I want to break into as many systems as possible and get the biggest return for my investment, am I going to write a piece of malware that runs on 90% of all operating systems, which is Windows? Or am I going to write a piece of malware that runs on 6%, which is Mac? You're going to go for the 90. So it's because of the installation base that makes it a bigger target. There has been malicious code for Macs, for other platforms. It's just a lower return on investment. So most of the high-end malware is going to always be Windows-based. So that's why using a non-Windows system helps protect you. Now, that doesn't mean that as people listen to my advice and John's advice and they start using iPads, that we're not going to see more and more iPad-based malware. But even when that happens, because you have two devices and your data is on the Windows and not on the iPad, even if they do write malicious code for the iPad, it won't impact it because there's no sensitive information or data loaded.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And then now, as at least the time of us recording this will live on out there, on the internet forever. But as of right now, it's July, 23rd. So we're still in the heat of COVID-19. Everybody's working. I shouldn't say everybody, but the vast majority are working remotely. All my personal employees are now working remotely and so forth. And there seems to be a trend of, most small business owners that I'm talking to right now, even once COVID-19, is done, gone, surpasses, whatever that looks like, they plan on staying virtual. What are some different things that we can do with now remote employees to I guess, prevent or help protect ourselves?
First, we have a joke in my household with my kids where you always have to go dun, 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 and you got to say the COVID, right? It's not COVID-19, it's the COVID, right? Is what we call it in the house, because it's just like you say it and just people freak out. But you're right, with the COVID, it's going to be a new normal. Like my kids don't like hearing it, but I'm wondering whether even in the next 3 or 4 years, whether there'll be school again, like whether there'll be movie theaters. I joke with my kids that I go up and say, I remember when there was 8-track tapes. I remember when there were VCRs, and I told my son, you're going to be able to tell your kids you can remember when there were movie theaters, right? Because I don't know how they can make them safe based on these new fears. But you're right, remote workforce, new future. To me, the big things is, one, make sure you're protecting the endpoint. Because a lot of people, when they were in the office, you had a lot of tech protecting you. If you're in a real estate office or in your banking office, whatever office you're in, they had firewalls, IDSs, and a lot of technology that was protecting, monitoring, and filtering your email and your web surfing without you even realizing it. So it was a very, very safe environment. Well, now that you work from home, correct me if I'm wrong, but I bet you don't have a data center in your home with a firewall and an IDS, right? Most people don't. So it's just you and your computer. So it's critical to make sure that you're running with, I said, the two devices, but make sure you're running an up-to-date operating system, fully patched, and run endpoint security. Now, I don't get kickbacks. I don't care if you do McAfee, Symantec, Sophos, Kaspersky, but you need to have endpoint security on those systems and make sure they're up-to-date and fully patched. So that's sort of scenario one, protect the endpoint. Second, ransomware is becoming a huge threat. And a lot of people only have their data on their computer and maybe online backup, but that could also get infected with ransomware. It's also important to buy a $200 hard drive. They're called an external drive. You can get them online, Amazon. I recommend 4 or 5 terabytes, and just once a week, plug it in, back up your data and unplug it. So once a week, you're getting a good, clean backup of your data. So now if your system gets infected or you get hit with ransomware, you don't pay the ransom. You have your data and you're able to recover it yourself. And then the third thing is most Zoom platforms that we're using here, online banking, Microsoft Office 365, all those things, they have security built in, but it's not turned on by default. So any platform you use, spend the 10 minutes and turn on the security. Now, the obvious ones are like two-factor authentication, so you can better verify and validate. The one that everyone misses, which is my favorite, is account notification. Do you realize if somebody breaks into your bank account and does an illegal wire transfer, EFT, electronic fund transfer, if you catch it within 24 hours, it's reversible. The problem is most people have no account notification. So somebody breaks in, does a EFT, and they know the number, so they do it below the limit so you don't get any alerts going on. And then at the end of the month, when you check your bank account, you realize you're missing $3,000 and the money's gone. So most banks have account notification, which means anytime somebody tries to do a transfer or anybody tries to go in and take money, you get a text notification. And this just happened a few days to me. I got a text notification at 7 p.m. at night that said, somebody's trying to do a 4K wire transfer out of your account. Is this valid? And I called my accountant real quick, checked a few things, and within 5 minutes I said no, and it got blocked. And it turned out to be fraudulent. If I didn't have that account notification, I would not have been able to stop it and I would have been out the money. So it's very important to turn on text notification for all your accounts so you can get some visibility, because the name of the game is this. And I'll steal it if you watch the John McAfee, good friend of mine, is you can't prevent attacks. They're going to happen. And if you try to prevent them, it's trivial. What you need to do is detect in a timely manner. It's all about visibility and detection. And I agree with John on that. So when you're working at home, when you're doing remote, when you're doing cloud, turn on all the automation, all the detection, because the visibility you have will let you control and contain the damage.
Yeah, love it, man. Is the main, and this might sound like a silly question, but I don't know what I don't know. Is the main thing to be concerned about, because you hear things like the value of data now surpassing gold. Is the main thing still, when it comes around our bank accounts and monetary, or are there other things that we may not think about, right, of protecting, like, okay, we're in real estate, we have all real estate clients' data and so forth. Are there things that you commonly see that small business owners may not think to protect?
It really comes down to what is the critical data that you need to run and operate your business. Here's the problem though. Most folks have been doing it for so long, they overlook the obvious. Like, I have a good friend of mine, she's a real estate agent, and we were just talking about cybersecurity. She's like, Eric, I don't really have anything of high value. If I got hacked and somebody broke into my computers, it wouldn't really cause any impact or damage to me or my business. And I just sort of looked at her and I'm like, really? She's like, yep. And she's been doing it for like 10 or 11 years. I'm like, okay, so a couple questions. Do you get pre-listing information? Do you get information about houses in prime markets where the property is going to go probably in 3 to 4 hours and it's going to go prime? And did you get insight into that? She goes, oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, and if another real estate agent found out about that, would they be able to potentially beat you to, oh yeah. I'm like, okay, so that's data point one. And she's like, oh, I didn't think about that. And I said, okay, what about your commissions, your margins, and some of those factors? Are those unique for different clients? And do you sometimes charge different rates for different clients? She said, absolutely. I said, so if some clients found out that you quote unquote overcharge them because somebody else, I said, could that get clients upset? Could that hurt your reputation? She said, absolutely. I said, do you want to keep going? Right. So, and I think she started realizing that she does have a lot of important critical information that if it was disclosed, altered, or destroyed, could cause big impact to her business. So just in that short conversation, We then made some changes, increased her security with some of the measures I talked about and backing up her data now. But I think a lot of people need to really step back and say, I do have critical data. What is it and how can I protect it?
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you brought that. I mean, most of our listeners are real estate agents as well. And again, it's stuff that I don't think that we think about, but is important stuff, man. And it's happening. I mean, it's more than anybody. If we probably knew the truth of the level that it happens, we'd probably be much more freaked out than we are.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll give as a little bonus, because a lot of your listeners are real estate agents, the biggest scam area, if you ask me, and I wasn't even on the show, the biggest scam area today is taking people's deposit before closing when they're buying houses. Because a lot of these closing companies that you utilize are usually pretty small. They don't have a whole lot of security, and they usually have the buyer go in and transfer the money 24 to 48 hours before the purchase. And it's usually pretty significant amounts of money. So I get called multiple times a week where somebody is buying a house and the closing company's mail server gets compromised. So the buyer of the house gets an email from the closing company saying, listen, the owner changed the bank that you need to send the deposit to. So you need to send your $80,000 to this bank. I know it's a last minute change, but this happens all the time. And they write back to their agent saying, is this valid? Is this correct? And they come in and say, yes, it's valid, it's correct. And they do it all via email. They go to their bank, they transfer the money, and then they show up 2 or 3 days later and they go, where's the deposit? And they go, what do you mean? I sent it 3 days ago. And they go, no, you didn't. And the money is gone because it's over 24 hours. So best advice I can give to real estate agents is telling their clients, when you're getting within a week of closing, do not use email to communicate. Pick up the phone, go in person, use out-of-band communication, use texting, use phone, but don't use email, because so many people are being scammed right before closing because they're trusting email, and email is way too easy to be compromised.
Yeah. And I'd say in the last couple of years, I mean, I've heard of a dozen plus stories of that actually taking place. I mean, it's been a huge issue in our industry for sure. I'm curious. I mean, and some people might say it's luck, right? I don't classify it as luck because you listen to your gut, you listen to your intuition. You went to, when you were in college, to the co-op, and that led to this. But you're somebody that has been able to find and follow your purpose in life, and you can hear it, man. Anybody that's watching or listening to this, you can see your excitement, your energy, even that's something that you've been doing now for 30 plus years. And, I speak to so many entrepreneurs, real estate agents, and so forth that have a very difficult time identifying what their purpose is and so forth. I know this is kind of taking a total pivot, a total transition, but, somebody that is so clear on their purpose. I'm curious, what have you found, or what advice do you give to people that reach out to you to be able to get clarity on what that purpose is and to be able to then go after it?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I just have to make one comment, because everyone has trigger words. And one of my trigger words is luck or lucky. And hopefully nobody gets mad at me. But what I always say is luck is a word that lazy people use when they don't want to admit somebody that worked their butt off, right? Because I'm not lucky. I will outwork you. I joke with anybody. If we go to the gym and we get on the treadmill and you get on the treadmill next to me, one of two things is going to happen. You're getting off first, or I'm getting taken to the hospital. But you will not beat me, right? You will not outwork me, even if you're in better shape. So to me, if you find yourself saying, I wish I was more lucky, work harder and more difficult. So, and willing to accept the difficulty. Now I'll answer the purpose, but I'll answer it with what I call the 2 Ps. And I think the 2 Ps is what often causes people a problem. And that's passion and purpose. In your life, you have multiple passions. Passions are things that you enjoy and love to do, but they can change throughout your life. Purpose is the reason why you were put on this planet. It's the unique skill that you do better than anyone else, and that doesn't change across your life. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the CIA, hacking was a passion of mine. I was passionate about hacking. If you met me back then, I was finding the latest I was super passionate guy. However, after 8 years, when it wasn't fun and exciting, I wasn't passionate anymore. So that passion burned out. However, my purpose of making cyberspace safe, I believe I was put on this planet to make cyberspace a safe place to live, work, and raise a family. That is my purpose, and that never, ever changes. So the way I always go in and help people find their purpose, because I get that a lot, is how do I find it? It's a couple of different exercises. One of them is if you didn't have to work. So you had whatever your number is, you had 50 million in the bank. It was constant. There was no risk of losing it. You didn't have to work. After you do the silly stuff, right? So after you go vacations and do that, after 6 months, you're going to be bored out of your mind. What are you going to do? If you didn't have to work, what would be the things that you would do because you truly enjoy it? I will tell you, I don't believe in retirement. If you look at the really, really successful people, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, they're in their 60s and 70s and they're still working, right? Retirement isn't for somebody who found their purpose because they still love that. So what are the things you do? I would still do keynotes. I would still do podcasts. I love helping people. I love teaching people. I love telling them about cybersecurity. I would do that even if I didn't have to. And to be honest with you, I don't. Right? At this point, I really don't, but I still love it. So that's the first thing. What would you do even if you didn't have to work? What would be the things that you would still do and still invest in? The next one is what I call a drill down exercise. And to me, the way you find your purpose is you find a why that's so strong. So I'm going to go in and say, if you're in real estate, why are you in real estate? And you might say, because I like viewing properties. Great. Why do you like viewing properties? Because blah, blah. Well, why? And what I do is I will sit there and ask you why 12 to 15 times. I'll keep drilling down and just why. Every answer you give, I'm going to push you and I'm going to push you. And after 12 to 15 levels, you're going to get to a point where you're going to find that purpose. Because your purpose has such a strong enough why. It's your fundamental reason of why you do things. You might not realize it, but the ultimate reason why you get up in the morning and you do whatever you do during the day is because of that inner drive, that inner purpose. If it wasn't there, if you didn't have that fire, you just stay in bed all day. You just have to, it gets covered up with so much BS over the years that you lose track of it. But if you really have somebody sincerely do that exercise with you, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this 12, 15 times? You will get to that root cause passion. Sorry, purpose. I want to make sure I get the right piece.
Yeah, no, I love that, man. So then, I'm curious with, because you've had different companies that you've created over the years, from smaller companies all the way up to multiple billion-dollar companies, and I'm trying to frame this the right way, but for somebody that's wanting to take their company big, what has been some of those differences from that you kind of figured out from, maybe a $10 or $20 million company to a multi-billion-dollar company?
Yeah. First thing I would say before I answer that is I would ask them, why? Are you sure? Are you really sure that you want to do that? And I know a lot of people disagree with me and have different perspectives. Yes. If you are the next Bill Gates, Elon Musk, or Google boys, if you're the next one of those, then yes, you should absolutely go and raise $20, $30 million, find some brilliant partners, and you should build a multi-billion-dollar organization and company. Definitely agree with that. For the rest of us mere mortals that aren't the Google boys and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, I would really question, is that the right approach? Because I've done both, and I found building and selling those 400, 500, or even multi-billion-dollar companies, the amount of work, energy, and effort that you get and what you're left with at the end is usually not as much as you think. Most people aren't going to be the next Jeff Bezos with Amazon, where you make 14 billion in a day, right? That's just not the reality of it. So typically with really big companies, when you get multiple rounds of investment and you do all that stuff, you're left with a very small piece. And usually I have folks, and me, when I've sold these billion-dollar companies, I'm left with a few million when you really do the math and everything else. On the other hand, my sweet spot, that all I've been doing for the last 10 years is building $5 to $7 million companies that have 60% margins. So now I'll keep it easy for you. You have a $6 million company and you're making $1 million a year. You're bringing home $1 million a year, and you position it to have a 6 or 7x multiplier. And then in 4 or 5 years, you sell it for 40 million, and you now keep all of that. So which would you rather have, 100% of 7 million or 1% or 0.1% of 2 billion? So I would say just be careful. Everyone wants the huge, big companies. Everyone wants to go to that next level, but is that really going to get you what you want? Is that really what your passion is? Because I find I can make a lot more money with the smaller companies than the bigger ones.
Yeah. I have a good mentor of mine that said something similar. He was like, life was so much fun when it was under a certain dollar amount, but as soon as his business surpassed that $500 million amount, he's like, lawsuits, now you're on your competitors' radars, and it was just a different world. I don't think people are always prepared for what they're signing up for. Yeah. So then how do you know when it's time to exit? Because being a guy that's created a lot of these companies, just like you talked about, instead of continuing with those companies, and keeping, the one and just sustaining that, or sustaining slower growth, when do you know it's time to sell? Or is it just a thing that maybe you get to where it isn't as fun for you, and maybe you lose that passion and it's time to rebuild something new?
To me, what it comes down to is a company is always for sale. It always is. I always do this joke with people. I'll ask you, Joshua, is your house for sale? And you'll probably say no. Well, you might know the trick, so you might say yes. But most people, when I say, is your house for sale? They'll say no. I'm like, is your car for sale? And they'll be like, no. I'm like, what if I give you 300 million for your house? Is it for sale? Absolutely. So to me, my companies are always for sale. And when it gets stupid not to sell, that's when I do that. So to me, if I can go in and walk away with 10 times more than what I'm making yearly. So if I'm making $1 million off of one company, and I can go in a transaction, and after taxes and everything else, I can walk away with 12 to 15 million, then to me, that's the right time to do that. That's sort of the right time, because that means that my multipliers got to the 8x, which means you're at the peak. Because with companies, you start off at a 1 or 2x, and when you're at the prime, you're at about an 8x. I mean, you sometimes hear stupid evaluations of 12 to 15, but usually 8 or 9 is the peak. And you got about a year or two of that, and then it's going to drop down because all the competition comes in. So to me, if somebody is willing to pay you 8 to 10 times the overall revenue of your company, then to me, it's time to sell it and then to move on.
Yep. Love it, man. Love it. So what then led you to, I know you're doing a lot of coaching, a lot of speaking and so forth. I mean, what led you down that route?
That's probably, if I had to really be clear, back to my purpose, it's to make cyberspace safe, but it's really to help and educate and mentor people. So I'll tell you right now, I have coaches. I mean, I think any good person should have a coach, and they always tell me to go, Eric, you're not making the money on the coaching that you do on your courses, on everything else, because I build the course, I throw it out there evergreen, and it makes money when I'm drinking pina coladas or on the beach. The coaching, you only make money when you're actually doing it. But I actually sort of have this hidden part of me that says I would never be where I'm at if somebody didn't help and coach me. So I almost feel like you have to give back. Like when I make money, I feel you have to tithe money. So I do give a certain percent to charities that I believe in, churches and schools and other organizations. But to me, what I found is tithing money is easy when you have a lot of it, because writing a check is not hard when you have a lot of it. However, true commitment and true giving back is giving something that you don't have a lot of that means a lot to you, which means the most valuable commodity to me is time. So I felt the way that I could truly give back and help people is not by writing checks, but by writing checks with my time, because that's a much more valuable asset. And I find that just doing that gives me so much satisfaction. I mean, that's where you really get joy and happy. It's great to sell a company and make a lot of money, but when you help somebody else overcome an obstacle and they're able to be successful, or they're able to send their kids to school or buy them a car, I mean, that to me, when you're helping other people, that's when it really gets to that next level of enjoyment and satisfaction in life.
Yeah, and with your expertise, man, I mean, you can coach people on so many different things. Right? What is it a broad range of coaching that you do, or is it specific to the cyberspace? Or at this point, are you also helping other entrepreneurs grow their businesses and so forth?
Most of what I do is on technology entrepreneurs. So a lot of what I'm doing today is really, really smart technology people that are just really bad business people. Because I don't think, and it bothers me when you see these situations, and I've been in some of them with companies where I'm making all the money and I'm making 5%, and hopefully you or nobody else listening to this gets mad, but you have some MBA that went to some elite school that works 3 hours a day, plays golf, doesn't do anything, and they're taking 90%. To me, that's not how the system was meant to be. That entrepreneurs should be able to take 90% if it's really their idea. So what I really try to do is teach techie people that have the intellectual property how they can be an entrepreneur and actually get the rewards of their labor. Because I just don't like that model out there today, where the person that does all the work, that brings all the intellectual property, that has all the brains, is getting 5%. And somebody who went to an elite business school gets 90%. So that's really where I try to help technologists be entrepreneurs so they can cash in on their value.
Yep, love it, man. So then, quick question for those that are, let's just say, I don't know whether they're startup phase or not, but question I get reached out to from a lot of our podcast listeners is, they're kind of torn between, do I continue to bootstrap this company, or do I go out there and raise capital? I mean, being a guy that has probably done both, right? What is your recommendation when people are thinking about seeking capital versus just continuing to self-fund?
My number one question I'm going to ask is, what exactly are you going to use the capital for? So you want to go out and raise $3 million. Why? What exactly are you going to use that for? What value is that going to provide to the company? And then, is that worth, it's hard to say because I don't know the evaluation, but for $3 million, you could be giving away anywhere between 20 to 60% of your company, depending on where it's at in the evaluation. So the question is that worth it? Is that worth it? Now, yes, in some cases, if you have a unique blue ocean, and in order to become the category king, you have to move quickly because competition is moving in. You see the fins on the horizon, right, of the sharks and stuff, and you need to get your message out there very, very quickly. And you've done the research and believe that if you had $3 million for marketing, so you can go in and market and get your message out to your ideal client, you know who they are, you know where they're set up and everything else, then depending on what % of the company you need to give up, that might be worth it. That might be worth it there. But so many entrepreneurs out there, now with COVID, it's changed a little, but prior, VCs were giving out money like candy on Halloween to anybody that wanted it because they knew there were a lot of great ideas. But if you're telling me, oh, I'm going to do 3 million so I can grow my company, specifically, how are you going to grow? Oh, I don't know, get more customers. Well, who's your ideal customer? Well, I don't know. Well, how are you going to market to them? Well, I don't know. What specifically are you going to use that 3 million for? I don't know. Don't take the money. So I think if you're very clear on the reason and the purpose, then there are some cases where it makes sense. But I would say, an estimate, but what I've seen, probably 70% of people that take money are doing it to play it safe because they just want to go in and, oh, I just want to have money in the bank, or I want somebody to give me a salary. But here's what you don't realize. If you go in and take investment and you give up control of your company, you're going to give up control of your company. And a lot of times I've seen people where they're making $400K a year. They have $1 million company and they take $5 million worth of investment the investors take control of the company, and they now say you can't get paid more than 150. So their lifestyle gets drastically changed because you gave up control. So I'm a fan that once in a while, I believe that there's reasons for funding, but I think people take it a lot more often than they need to because they want to play it safe. And as soon as you play it safe, you're not hungry. And as soon as you're hungry, as soon as you stop being hungry, the company dies.
Yeah, no, powerful stuff, man. I'm curious. I know we talked about your coaching and some of the consulting that you do there, but then you also mentioned your evergreen courses and so forth. Are the courses also in that same space with courses around helping tech entrepreneurs, or are the courses a different space?
Yeah, so the courses right now, I'm always rolling out new courses. The courses I have right now are if you want to build a virtual CISO, Chief Information Security Officer business. Now, I'll be honest with you. The course is written for people that want to build a vCISO business. However, day one of the course is all about starting the business, setting up the business, and figuring out the business. The second day is all about sales and marketing. And then it's only the third day where I actually talk about what it means to be a Chief Information Security Officer. So I often joke that if you want to start a business and understand what it takes, how to do it, how to do sales and marketing, the first 2 days of the course are going to be exactly for you. The third day might be a little off on tech, but I think it'll still give you a lot of value.
Yeah, love it. Powerful stuff. So I got one last question for you, but before we jump into that, for those that want to continue following you, that want to reach out, learn more about you and so forth, what's the best place to do that at and to continue to follow you and be able to get in touch with you?
So if you want to find out about security, securing your business or organization, my company is Secure Anchor. So secure-anchor.com is the way to go. If you want things on entrepreneurship, motivation, and things like that, any social media is Dr. Eric Cole, DrEriccole. So on Insta or Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, if you go to DrEriccole, I spend 45 minutes in my studio every morning just producing content. So we're putting out 2 to 3 videos a day. And then if you really want to follow up with me or I can help you, Ecole, E-C-O-L-E, at secure-anchor.com, Ecole at secure-anchor.com. I will tell you though, I get a ton of emails. So it might take me a little time to get back to you, but if you do have a real question and I can help you, I'd love to hear from any of the listeners.
Yeah, no, love it. And those watching and listening will make it super easy on you wherever you're at. If you just scroll below, we'll have all of Dr. Eric Cole's information down there, all the links, everything that he just stated, social media handles, all that will be right below. So one last question for you. If knowing everything you know now today, if you could go back and have a conversation with your earlier self when this whole journey began and give yourself 2 pieces of advice that you feel would have really just fast forwarded this, insane success trajectory that you've been on. Again, knowing everything you know now today, what would those 2 pieces of advice look like?
First piece of advice would be jump sooner. So to me, everyone's at that point where you're at the top of the mountain, you're playing it safe. I'm working at the CIA, I'm working at other companies, and you decide I'm going to jump and you take that chance. When you first jump, you get cut up, it's always rough. But once you figure that out and that parachute opens, that's when you really start living life. So I would have taken risks sooner. I would have taken risks sooner, more upfront, as opposed to waiting later in the life when I actually did. And then the second big piece of advice I would have done is, and I've done very, very well, but when I was very young, I would have started investing sooner. And I would have told myself, read the book, The Richest Man in Babylon, 4 times. Because that book is really gold. That book is a secret to life. And that could make anybody a millionaire, even if you decide to stay at the government. So I wish I was told to read earlier. Like I didn't start reading The Richest Man in Babylon until I was 48. Tony Robbins, I didn't get introduced to 49. A lot of those motivational ones. So I would have told myself, take those classics, Richest Man in Babylon, Think and Grow Rich, Unlimited Power, and read them when I'm 18, 19, and 20. Because those books have so much good, valuable information in them that I wish I had when I was 20 and not waited till I was 45.
Yeah. Yep. Powerful stuff. And Dr. Eric Cole, I know how busy you are and taking time out of your busy to be here with us, man. This truly means a lot. This has been a huge honor. And thank you so much for taking time out of your precious day to be here.
Well, thank you. This was awesome. And I had a great time. Thank you for putting me on the show.
Yep, 100%, my friend. And those watching and listening, as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and we will see you next time. Hope you enjoyed this GSD Mode podcast episode. Now make sure you get shit done and smash that subscribe button now.